Imagine getting slapped with a $16,000 fine.
Oof.
Yeah, for like...
Per text.
Yeah, per text message.
Yeah.
And that's the reality businesses are facing if they're not ready for these FCC one-to-one consent rules.
Yeah, the new rules.
So we're diving deep into it today.
Absolutely.
So you know what it means for you as a business owner, what to do to stay compliant.
Welcome to the Commio Cast. I'm Tim McLean, Commio's Director of Marketing. Thanks for tuning in. Here we talk about all things cloud communications. Think modern calling and text messaging and more, all in the cloud. In this episode, as always, our hosts Micah and Kali join us from their virtual recording studio at Notebook LM. Guys, take it away.
We've got articles, legal summaries, even a breakdown of an expert webinar to kind of guide us through this.
We do.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a clear action plan and know exactly what steps to take before that January 27th, 2025 deadline.
It's coming up quick.
It's coming up quick. But first, let's talk about why the FCC decided to shake things up with this new rule.
Well, think about how many times you've gotten a call or text from a company you barely remember giving your info to.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's annoying, right?
So annoying.
Yeah, the FCC is trying to stop the flood of those unwanted marketing calls and texts.
Okay.
By giving consumers more control over who can contact them and how.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does this new rule actually work?
You know those websites where you enter your info to compare, say, insurance quotes or something?
Oh, yeah, and then suddenly your phone's blowing up.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So before this rule, businesses could use that general website consent as like a free pass to just contact you.
Oh, wow.
But now they need your direct individual consent
Oh, okay.
for each seller who might contact you
Got it.
via robocall, robotext, or even those AI-powered calls and voicemails.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, we're talking individual consent for each specific company,
Okay.
not just a blanket agreement for whoever the lead generator might sell your info to.
That's a pretty big change.
It is a big change, and it doesn't just apply to marketing messages.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this rule covers any call made using automated technology, even informational calls or communications from call centers.
So even if I'm not blasting out sales pitches, I still need to be careful.
Exactly. The FCC is serious about protecting consumers from unwanted calls and texts, no matter what the reason for the call is.
Yeah, and I'm guessing they're not messing around with the penalties either.
No, they're not. Fines can range from $500 to $1,500.
Per call.
Per call or text.
Wow.
Made without the proper consent, and that's just from lawsuits.
Oh, my gosh.
The FCC itself can impose fines of up to $16,000 per violation.
Okay, this is a big deal.
Big deal.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of compliance. What are the key things businesses need to do to avoid those fines?
Well, first, you need to understand that topical and logical connection is key here.
Okay.
You can't, for example, get consent for a mortgage quote and then start texting someone about car insurance.
Right.
The consent has to be directly related to the product or service the consumer was initially interested in.
So that makes sense, keeps businesses from taking advantage of consumers who are just trying to get information.
Absolutely. Another crucial point is that you need to have possession of the consent. You can't rely on a lead generator or vendor to hold on to those records.
Right.
The company making the calls needs that documentation.
Got it.
And it can't be like some hidden line of API data. You need to have it.
So if I'm working with a lead generation company, I need to make sure I'm getting copies of those consent forms myself.
You got it. Don't assume someone else is taking care of it.
Okay.
You're the one making the calls, so you're the one that'll be held responsible.
Makes sense. All right, so what about manual dialing? If I'm not using an auto dialer, am I in the clear?
Not necessarily. Even if you're dialing manually, you should consider using a human selection vendor just to be extra safe.
Okay.
And keep in mind that some states actually have even stricter laws than the FCC.
Oh, wow.
Connecticut, for example, might still require express written consent even for manual calls.
So it's really about erring on the side of caution, even if you think you might be exempt.
Right. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially with those hefty fines.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, so we talked about the why behind the rule and some general principles.
Yeah.
Now let's dive into those 7 tips for complying with the new one-to-one rule. You ready to get specific?
Absolutely. Tip number 1 is all about those checkboxes on your web forms. Remember what we said about individual consent for each seller?
Yeah.
That's right. Each company that the consumer might be contacted by needs its own opt-in box.
Okay.
No more like blanket agreements buried in the fine print.
Got it.
So if you're running a site that lets people compare insurance quotes from different companies,
Yeah.
each insurance provider needs its own separate checkbox.
Makes sense. So no more bundling everybody together.
Exactly. And that brings us to tip number 2, conspicuous disclosure.
Okay.
The language around consent needs to be clear and prominent and easy to understand.
Right.
Don't try to bury it in legalese or hide it behind a bunch of links.
So it's about being upfront and transparent with people.
Right, you're asking for their consent to contact them. So make it very clear what they're agreeing to. Tip number 3 reinforces this one seller, one form.
Yeah.
The company making the call has to be the one named on the consent form.
Got it.
No more listing like a lead generator and then making oral offers from a different company.
So, like, if I'm a mortgage broker,
Yeah.
I can't use a generic lead gen form and then call people offering my services.
Right.
The form has to explicitly name my brokerage.
That's right. And this is especially important for agents. Tip number 4. Agents need carrier consent.
Okay.
If you're an agent, you need consent from the actual brand or carrier you're representing, not just your agency.
So an insurance agent, for example, would need consent from the specific insurance company, not just their agency.
Precisely. Now let's talk about what not to do.
Okay.
Tip number 5 is simple. No oral consent.
Okay.
Don't try to get sneaky and record someone verbally agreeing to be contacted.
Right.
The FCC has made it very clear that that's not going to fly.
So no more by staying on the line you consent to?
Nope. You need that clear written consent. Which brings us to tip number 6, document everything.
Okay.
You need solid proof of consent.
Get it.
Preferably using a service like Active Prospect or Journoya that provides those detailed records.
Yeah.
Don't rely on a simple token or some internal system that might not hold up under scrutiny.
So it sounds like it's worth investing in a good system to track consent, just in case you ever get audited or face a lawsuit.
Absolutely. And finally, tip number 7, don't delay.
Yeah.
You need to start getting compliant now.
Right.
This rule applies to all leads you call after January 27th, even ones that you generated before the deadline.
So even if I collected leads last year, I still need to make sure I have the right kind of consent before I contact them after the deadline.
That's exactly right. This rule is a game changer.
Yeah.
You need to be ready for it.
This all sounds pretty intense, but I guess it's better to be safe than sorry,
Right.
especially with those potential fines.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned earlier that this rule could actually be used to a business's advantage. How so?
That's a great question. While the FCC's one-to-one rule might seem like a burden,
Yeah.
at first glance, it actually presents a really cool opportunity to build trust and stronger relationships with consumers.
Okay.
So think about it. When people know exactly what they're signing up for and that you respect their inbox and you're not going to spam them,
Right.
they're more likely to actually trust you and engage with your messages.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like saying, hey, I value your time and attention enough to ask for your permission before I reach out.
Exactly.
Feels less intrusive.
Right. And that respect translates into better relationships and ultimately a more successful business.
Yeah, for sure.
Plus, since consumers are opting into specific offers, you can use this to segment your audience more effectively.
Okay.
No more blasting out generic messages that annoy people.
Right.
You can target your communications based on what they've actually expressed interest in.
So it's a win-win. Consumers feel respected, and businesses can send more effective marketing messages.
Precisely. And there's another layer to this. By being transparent about your communication practices, you're setting yourself apart from businesses that are still using those shady, spammy tactics.
Right.
You're signaling that you're a trustworthy company that respects its customers.
And that's a powerful differentiator, I think, in today's market,
Absolutely.
where consumers are bombarded with messages from all directions.
Yeah. This rule might feel like a hurdle,
Yeah.
but it's actually an opportunity to stand out and build a brand that people trust and want to engage with.
I feel like I have a much better grasp on this whole FCC one-to-one consent rule now.
Yeah.
And how it's going to impact businesses.
And more importantly, how you can use it to your advantage.
Exactly. But I'm sure some listeners are feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this.
Yeah, probably.
Where can they go to dig even deeper or double-check their compliance strategy?
Well, you're in luck. Our friends over at Commio, that's pronounced Commio, by the way,
Yeah.
they actually hosted a whole webinar on complying with this rule. And you can find the recording on their blog.
That's great. So that probably goes into even more detail about the specific.
It does. Yeah, they've got practical tips, real-world examples, and they even look at some of the tools and services that can help make this whole compliance thing easier.
Speaking of tools, you mentioned that Commio offers a free service to help businesses make sure they're on the right track with all this.
Yeah, they offer a free, what they call a smart review of your texting campaigns.
Okay.
So their team will actually look at your opt-in language, your privacy policy, your terms and conditions, and just make sure you're doing everything right.
It's like having a compliance coach in your corner.
Exactly. So if you're feeling unsure about whether you're fully compliant, definitely take advantage of their expertise.
Yeah.
You can find all that at Commio.com.
Okay, and don't wait till the last minute, folks. The January 27th deadline is coming up fast.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the FCC's one-to-one consent rule. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the reasons behind it to the potential benefits for businesses.
Absolutely.
But the main takeaway here is that this isn't something to be afraid of.
No.
It's an opportunity to embrace a more transparent and ethical way of doing business.
A business that respects its customers.
Until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.
Building amazing experiences that engage and delight your customers is easy with Commio. Our smart, reliable voice and messaging solutions are easy to implement and scale with you so you can deliver more calls and texts, be more competitive, and save money. With Commio, you get peace of mind and happier customers. Find out why thousands of software platforms and enterprises trust Commio with their communications. Get a demo today.